So you've always had dreams of owning your favorite arcade machine, but they're so heavy. They're really hard to find. They're incredibly hard to work on. The power bill must be crazy, and most importantly, they must be ungodly expensive, right? Wrong. Over the course of my adult life, I have collected 20 of my favorite arcade machines. And this is the video series where I tell you the story behind each and every single one of them, and how, if you're looking in the right places at the right time, these machines can actually be substantially cheaper than buying a modern video game console. So buckle up, my video game enthusiasts, because today I'm gonna tell you the story of how I got one of my favorite and most classic arcade machines of all time. Okay, so if you've been along for the last few videos, you know how I got my Mortal Kombat 2. You also know how I got my Final Fight machine, and most recently, we talked about my favorite sit-down arcade racer, Rush 2049. Now, when we were talking about Rush 2049, I told you that I got that machine at the same time from the same person as I got another machine. And that machine is X-Men. Now, if you remember from the Rush 2049 video, I told you just how incredibly cheap I got that machine for. If you thought that was inexpensive, wait until we talk about the super score I got on this X-Men machine and what condition it was in when I got it, and just exactly what I have done to it over the years since I have purchased this machine. Oh, and don't worry, we're definitely going to talk about this awesome light up Wolverine cowl. So one of my favorite arcade machines of all time is X-Men. This game was developed and published in-house at Konami. Now, back through the 90s, Konami was known for their arcade beat-em-ups like X-Men, including other awesome beat-em-ups like Ninja Turtles or The Simpsons. Mostly known for their big, broad, 4-player cabinets. I used to have so much fun in the arcades playing on these big giant cabinets, and I always thought, man, how cool would it be one day to own a cabinet like this, where I could have 3 of my friends over, we can order up some pizza, and just play these games until the sun came up. Well, about 20 years ago, that dream came true. This was my very first 4-player arcade cabinet. Now, this is actually a dedicated X-Men cabinet, which, if you remember the story on the Final Fight, what that means is this machine was designed by Konami to be an X-Men arcade. It wasn't converted from some other machine. All right, it's time to go berserk on these dudes. And one of the fun things about the X-Men arcade that a lot of people don't know is obviously it's based off of the 90s hit cartoon X-Men. But the plot of this game in specific was the Pride of the X-Men, which a lot of people probably don't know, but Pride of the X-Men was the pilot for the original animated television series. So the storyline that you're playing here is very similar to the Pride of the X-Men. Pride with a Y, you get it? Every kid that grew up in the 90s absolutely loved X-Men, mostly because Fox did a killer job with that animated show, as we saw recently with the return of X-Men with X-Men 97, which was also a fantastic show. If you haven't seen that one, I highly suggest checking it out. So that's why I always wanted an X-Men, but the question is, how did I get my mitts on an X-Men? Well, if you remember the story I told about the Rush 2049, I actually saw it in an ad, and when I went to the gentleman's house to check it out, he had this machine in his garage also. So, truth be told, I only had enough money to buy the Rush 2049, but I asked anyways. If for some reason I bought both of these, would you give me some kind of screaming deal? And sure enough, he made me an offer that I just couldn't refuse. So when I went up to get the cash for Rush 2049, I pulled the extra money out of what little savings that I had. And just how much was that? Well, this machine right here, $150. And that was with everything in working order. This monitor that's still in this machine is still the original monitor that was in it when I bought it nearly 20 years ago. But this machine is in stellar condition. Let's check this thing out. Right now, I have my Christmas lights draped over it because, you know, it's the holiday season. But when I did get this thing, much like the Final Fight, the T-molding was black. The first thing I wanted to do was really make this machine pop. And how else would you make an X-Men arcade machine pop than to give it some yellow T-molding? The yellow just matches everything so incredibly well. Now, you can't really see it because I got these machines so close to each other, but all of the art is 100% completely intact on the sides, all the way down to Nightcrawler, who's hiding out down there. One of the things I did do, like you've noticed in the other machines, is I repainted the face of this black and I filled in all of the crossbar holes. You can tell I wasn't very good at wood filling at the time, but hey, what are you gonna do? If you don't remember, the crossbars that go across here are to keep people from breaking into the machines and stealing, you know, all the coins. Because at any given time, back in the 90s, these machines could have a couple $100s in them. So people used to break into them and steal that money all the time. So if everything was so perfect and all I did was the yellow T-molding, what kind of upkeep have I done over the years? Well, if you know anything about these Konami arcade machines, then you may know that they have this kind of special little weakness built into them, and that is on the game board itself. Let me grab one and I'll see if I can show you. So here we have, this is part of a Ninja Turtles board. Now this is a 2-player Ninja Turtles, but let me show you exactly what happens to these things. So this here is what an arcade game board looks like. This is the entire game. Just think of it as a big, giant, like console cartridge, because that's basically what it is. If you see this up here, this is where your harness pops on, and once your harness is on, the game typically just plays. Now, most Konami boards had an interesting little flaw, and if you look here, this one is already starting to do it. This black board here is actually the sound board. This is where all of your audio for the game comes from. Now, these little guys here are like little diodes, and if they start leaking, they will leak down into the soundboard and completely corrupt your audio. This one doesn't look too bad yet, but if you look, I don't know how well this is gonna, yeah, you can see it. You see how we're starting to get a lot of corrosion in between these diodes? This is what happens. This corrosion sets in, and then this soundboard itself just completely stops working. You can see where the sound out is right here. Although this problem really didn't start presenting itself until, you know, arcades were sort of closing or going out of business. So I would imagine Konami didn't care too much about it, but it was a problem for somebody who was collecting these machines. And about 2 years after I got this X-Men, my sound started crackling. I had no idea that this was a problem at the time. And so I started browsing a lot of the message boards and stuff for other arcade owners, and I found out about this flaw in these Konami boards. I pulled my board out, and sure enough, that whole chip was completely corroded. Within 2 or 3 weeks of first signs of crackle, audio completely went out on my X-Men. It was heartbreaking because, I don't know, you can hear it now. Like 50% of the joy of these games is the audio. I mean, if you've played this game, you know what I'm talking about. X-Men. You know, it's just... Anyway, I found a couple people on there who were willing to share just which diodes you needed to buy in order to fix this problem. This was back in the day when Radio Shack was still a thing, and they were like, you just go to Radio Shack and you get this number diode, this number. So I went and bought them all, and what you gotta do is you have to take alcohol, completely clean that whole corroded area up, and strip all of that paint, because that black stuff is actually sealant that's sealing in that chip. So the diodes are actually sealed to the chip. You strip all that off, and you pull those little diodes off, and then you have to solder new ones on. Now, this was way back in the day before I knew any Dr. Mod, and I was soldering myself. Let me see if I can show you what this board looks like. And I will say, it works. You can hear it. I fixed it, but it's about the ugliest hack job you've ever seen. We're gonna shine this thing in there and see if we can take a look. Okay, so you see all those blue diodes that are just like hanging off the board there? Yeah, that's my repair job. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but you know, I have a working X-Men that has beautiful audio, and nobody ever sees inside here, so kind of doesn't really matter. One of these days, maybe I'll open it back up and have Dr. Mod over and see if he can help me make it just a little bit prettier. But all in all, this big giant 27-inch monitor has stayed just about in perfect shape. I say that now, and watch, it's gonna have to be recapped sooner than later, I'm sure. One of the other things that people point out when they come over or in the backgrounds of my videos is this awesome Wolverine cowl. It's even wearable. Check this out. Look at that. It's not the most comfortable thing in the world to wear, and it kind of almost looks a little more like Hawkman or something. But this wonderful piece was actually 3D printed. I would love to say that Dr. Mod 3D printed it, but Dr. Mod did not 3D print this one. This one, I wish I could remember who it was, but this one was 3D printed by somebody that I met at one of the Fire and Ice little conventions they have, and he sold it to me. He did a killer job at painting it, but I will say, speaking of Dr. Mod, he's the one that helped me mount this dummy head with the light on it, so it can be perfectly displayed with light up eyes. And it sits on top of my arcade machine like the most perfect arcade topper of all my arcades, pretty much. Now, Dr. Mod did actually print me that Boo, and if you see the chain chomp back behind Mario there, and this awesome giant Bullet Bill who unscrews and has a couple little special hiding spots inside of him. Now, the fun thing about owning a 4-player Konami cabinet is you can just go out and buy yourself like a 4-player Ninja Turtles or a 4-player Simpsons, and it plugs right into this and plays without having to do anything to it, which is actually what I have. I have a 4-player Simpsons and a 4-player Ninja Turtles that I pop into this thing and play periodically. So that is one of the benefits to having one of these 4-player Konami arcade cabinets. It's pretty cool. The only problem is, you know, when you move these things around, this whole panel here is super wide. So you actually have to pop the thing off. There's a little sneak peek underneath the board there. Oh, I guess I could have showed you my hack job from here. But it actually unbolts pretty easy, and this whole panel just comes off, and it makes it, you know, it makes it like a regular size arcade machine. And if you've ever owned an arcade machine, then you probably already know, but all arcade machines kind of have like this fabled story of like, oh, those machines do this thing, and the Konami does the audio thing. It's just a thing. And if you want to know more about that, the next arcade that we're going to talk about in my collection just recently started doing the old audio pop, so I'm going to have to do one of my hack job repairs on this baby soon. Maybe a video like this makes you think, man, you know, owning an arcade machine isn't too bad, and maybe it's not too expensive if you know where to look, because you can still find killer deals of people getting rid of these machines out of their homes and their collections. Some of these machines in my collection, up until very recently, I got for free. All they wanted was for me to come remove it from their house. So keep an eye out for stuff like that if you want to get into collecting. So if you missed the last episode where I talked about Rush 2049, you should check it out right here, because that is by far my favorite sit-down arcade racing cabinet of all time. And if you don't want to miss the next episode, which is on this machine here, you should subscribe to the channel right here. And until then, my friends, enjoy the journey.